Testing. You all hear me? Yeah, okay. All right. Is that better? All right. Um, Welcome. My name is Jelani Cobb. I'm Dean of Columbia Journalism School. I am fortunate to have with me on my left Rashid Shabazz, who is the executive director of Critical Minded, and on my right, Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, who very many of you, if not all of you, know, editor extraordinaire, and so on. So I just want to say first, welcome to all of you. This started, as most things do, with a series of conversations, and this was last year as we were observing all of the celebrations of the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And we were having conversations. Liz and I were talking about, no one's recognized all the journalism and criticism that covered and contextualized this culture over the course of its existence for the past half century. And we're like, yeah, somebody should do that. And I think it went from somebody should do that, and we didn't revisit that conversation for about 3 months.
Yeah, we took our time.
We took our time, right, because we knew that there would be a lot of work associated with it if we actually did. But some time went by, and nobody else said we're going to do this, so we started working on it ourselves, and it has been a lot of work, but also a lot of joy, and the pleasure of being able to collaborate around this. And I'll just say my own motivation here as Dean of Columbia Journalism School is that, we talked about the extent to which the journalists who covered rock, especially rock at its inception, and how those journalists just passed into the canon of American journalism. People stopped referring to them as rock journalists. So if you talk about Grail Marcus, he's a critic. Or Lester Bangs, he's a critic, or people are just journalists. And it became blindingly clear that that had not happened with the people who covered hip hop. And we'll get into the conversations around why that didn't happen over the course of the next, these panels this evening and over the course of the conversations tomorrow. But the one thing that I did know was that Columbia Journalism School holds a lot of weight in the journalism world. And I said that we could start this conversation, that we can celebrate the work, and we can analyze the work, and we can recognize the tradition that has been such a vital part of American journalism, even if American journalism doesn't entirely know it. And so we're happy to have you all here, and thank you for coming out. And I also want to just say really quickly, thank you to all of my people at Columbia Journalism School. I won't name everyone, because this would not have been possible without them. People work really, really hard. And also thank you to the Ford Foundation, which stepped up with critical support for this program as well. And so I'll pass it to Rashid to say a few words now as well.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jelani. As he said, my name is Rashid Shabazz. I'm the inaugural executive director of Critical Minded, an organization that was formed by Elizabeth Mendez-Berry and another colleague of ours, Chiwe Young, who, with the commitment to supporting cultural critics of color. And so obviously this conversation is centered right in this middle of that and why we're supporting it. I just wanted to say to Jelani and to Elizabeth, can we give them both a round of applause? They both have full-time jobs, and they're both extremely busy beyond measure. And to have witnessed their commitment, this has been a true labor of love, being in the weekly meetings with them, but particularly knowing a dean of the most prestigious journalism school in the world, taking his personal time to really nurture and think about how to bring this together. I just want to say it's been so humbling and just so honored. Thank you, Jelani. And to Elizabeth, I'll say all these things again tomorrow, probably as well, but Elizabeth, who's also on the board, so I'm not just saying this because you're my board member, but, we've known each other almost over 20 years, and from the time that I can remember, you've always had a love for hip-hop and also love for centering women's voices within that, and particularly ensuring that the culture is always true and honest to itself, we always say, keeping it real. So I want to thank you, Elizabeth, for your vision, for your love, for writers, of all trades, all backgrounds. So thank you so much. I'm not going to be long. I just want to say thank you to the Schomburg Center, our host for this evening, and for our collaborators. And Jelani also mentioned the Ford Foundation. But I also want to thank the entire Columbia team again, who's been tremendous. Without their support, this would not be possible. And to our event hosts, Maestra and Stacy and her team as well, for bringing this all together. And the last thing I'll say is just, Elizabeth, thank you so much, as always, for the work for creating Critical Minded and the work you now do at One World as an executive editor. So I will pass it to you, and I will continue these words tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Rashid and Jelani, and thank you so much to the Columbia team, to the Schomburg team, to the Ford Foundation, and every single person who's been part of making this possible. I have so much to say, and it's honestly such an honor to look out into the audience and see some of the most incredible writers, that I have had the good fortune of working with. Oliver Wong was my first editor in the United States Jeff Chang, Akiba Solomon, Karen Good, virtuosos, everybody, so many incredible writers, editors here. And I think it is important to say, as we get into this conversation, that as we were thinking about this event, there were two things at the center of kind of North Stars. One was Greg Tate, a critic, a person who could not be contained by that label. I came up as a tater tot. I don't know if any other tater tots here, but I was so fortunate to learn from him, and his generosity of spirit and his power both in the community and on the page, is so much informing this gathering. And Jelani and I had been talking about how we might honor him and how we might celebrate specifically the impact of his hip-hop journalism, which is not to diminish all of the other things, the power of what he's done. So that's one piece, and we look forward to tomorrow, a really beautiful conversation celebrating his legacy. And also the fact that we will be launching something very exciting as well. And then the other thing is that we wanted this to be a multi-generational conversation. We know that there are 8 million stories to be told about hip-hop journalism, and all of them should be told. And at the same time, what we were really hoping to accomplish in this event was something that would resonate across generations with the YouTubers, the podcasters, the social media mavens, as well as the originators and the many, many people who have contributed to this work. So I hope you all enjoy this evening. I'm delighted to welcome Sydney Madden, who's from NPR, one of the co-hosts of Louder Than a Riot, which I think did incredible reporting on hip-hop. I encourage you all to listen to that podcast, rich, powerful. And Sydney, come on out. Thank you so much.
Yes, who we're really here for, yes. All right, can y'all hear me? Okay. Thank you so much to the Columbia Journalism School, the Schomburg Center, Critical Minded, and the Ford Foundation. Again, my name is Sydney Madden. I'm a hip-hop journalist and a culture critic. I work at NPR. And thanks, y'all, for being here. Give it up for yourselves. And these incredibly accomplished, distinguished women I have on stage with me represent across generations, mediums, and disciplines. Give it up for Clover Hope,
yes,
Shamira Ibrahim, and Kiara Mayo. And Kiara Mayo. Yes. These people next to me have written cover stories, hosted podcasts, authored books, been showrunners, launched activations, headed up magazine mastheads, created their own magazines, co-written major motion pictures, penned critical, confrontational, and essential pieces of journalism that drive us all forward, and just generally brokered some of the most iconic moments that we have in Black media. These are cultural architects who are experts not only in music, but in marketing, in the art of conversation, in challenging and advocating for Black equity in the world of film, technology, healthcare. They have told stories that colored in the spaces that would otherwise be left out of the narrative. And to set up this conversation, I do want to just say that being a Black woman in the space of hip-hop journalism is a privilege and a unique and layered lens, but it is not the only lens. Even with the similarities you might hear in these stories, each woman up here represents a multitude of lived experiences. In the same way, we're not gonna relegate Light or Latifah or Missy or Nicki to being one of the best female rappers. These women up here are not here on this stage because they are women journalists. They are here as highly qualified journalists who are women, okay? All right. So this conversation is really gonna be about celebrating and learning from all of those multitudes. So first, to start us off, I feel like everyone should just introduce themselves, because if y'all leave it to me, we'll be up here the whole time. I'll just be talking. So introduce yourself in a few words, and to get us into the vibe of your music taste, what's one hip hop song that makes you feel most invincible and gets you in the mood to push that pen to paper? We'll start with
Want me
you,
to
Kira.
start?
Yes.
I'm Kierna Mayo. Oh, wow. Such beautiful people, so many people in this audience who I am. We are just a reflection of one another. One, y'all really look so good, still. I'd like to just put that on the floor. So to know me is to know that I've been doing this a long time. Not just hip-hop journalism per se, but capturing stories that might not have been told had it not been for a specific worldview, lens, curiosity, compulsion, right, for truth. And the truth that I have always been most led by is that of Black women. So when I was a 21-year-old person, a few days out of Hampton University, didn't get my internship at at Essence that I was dreaming about, because it was the only place in media that I could imagine a place for me. This is in 1991. I end up at The Source magazine, and when I say I found myself, I really am not exaggerating. There were so many parts of me that had not come together yet. I'm 21, I'm looking for me, a place that blends my hip hop sensibilities with my rising Black feminism that's happening and churning, and also just my curiosity and questions about the world, my anger. Like, I was pissed at 21. I'm pissed today, but I was pissed then too. And I needed a place for all of that to live, and I really found that in my first job at The Source. So, not giving a resume, but I will say that starting my career in the way that I started it, when I started it, and how I started it has everything to do with who I am today, and why I feel so blessed and honored to be on the stage with you sisters, because it's really a continuum. So that's my piece for now. Thank you.
And what's a hip hop song that makes you feel invincible?
Oh, okay. So I don't write to hip hop. And I know y'all are mad at Nicki, but Moment for Life is really, like, I really get my life from that. So that's an invincible song.
That's a good one.
Okay.
Shamira?
Hi, everybody. I'm Shamira. Really honored
Yes.
to be on the panel with everybody here today. I've been thinking about, like, the cute little slug line to give everybody about what I do. I still haven't really landed on a permanent one, but I think at the end of the day, I'm here to tell stories about Black life and give us humanity and texture. And wherever we meet the people and meet the public, I want to be able to amplify that story with as much humanity as I can. I've had the privilege of doing that in profiles, the occasional podcast these days, alongside Sydney, writing cover stories. But I think at the end of the day, I really want to be able to use my platform to be able to showcase what makes us beautiful, what makes us messy, what makes us complicated, what makes us interesting and worth celebrating and worth documenting and preserving. So that's my little spiel, right? When it comes to music, I thought about giving like a really high-minded answer to this question. I also don't write to hip hop. I'm very much like lo-fi instrumentals, but if I'm really trying to get in my bag, like really get in the vibe, I'm absolutely listening to Remy Ma's Conceited. Like that is my go-to song.
That's good. Hi, I'm Clover. I'm so excited to kind of just be in a room with just kind of multiple generations of writers and inspirations. I have kind of like an immigrant story. Like I came here as an immigrant, really young, 1 year old. I'm not gonna go back too far, but I'm a writer, editor, consulting producer, just kind of magazine junkie, a hip hop fan who kind of came up through just being a fan of magazines and just kind of being a fan of storytelling, books. I was a library kid. I always kind of wanted to immerse myself into these worlds that I wasn't part of, and I found that hip hop was a way to connect to something or like connect to a home. I think, not to get too existential, but always looking for like some concept of home, and I did find it in music. I found myself in music, like what Kierna was saying, and so over the years from 2005 when I graduated and interned at Vibe magazine and kind of worked, at Billboard and Double XL and Vibe and all these places, I just kind of like always felt a sense of home, mostly through the people and mostly through women who I worked with. And I gravitated to stories that kind of contain multitudes and people who contain multitudes and multiple identities and kind of have come from a space of storytelling where it's not just one story but like many stories and layered. And so I think we all kind of like represent that, and that's kind of been my I guess mission throughout my career from I guess over 20 years.
Yes.
Wow. Or about 20.
I love how you called yourself a library kid. I was absolutely a library kid.
Me too.
We probably all were. What is y'all's earliest memory of wanting to be a storyteller? Not only consuming stories and eating them up and dreaming up other worlds, but wanting to create your own.
I mean, I can answer that. That's a really profound question in a way. Because there's like the public notion of being a storyteller, like what we all have, like why you go to Columbia School of Journalism, but there's also just what it means to be a curious kid in the world. My great-grandmother always told stories, and I always felt compelled to capture them. I would like bring a tape recorder and just record her and just ask questions. I don't think I even knew the term journalism when I started doing this, but hearing my questions in playback sparked something in me and made me know that if not for me asking, maybe she wouldn't have the opportunity to tell. So my storytelling started really early, I'd say 6, 7, 8 on that level. But then as a professional storyteller, one, we're library kids, so books are everything. And being a reader, you can't help but have a connection to stories and like who makes them. Once you get past the story that you're actually reading, you start saying, who wrote this? Like who came up with this? So that happened for me really, really early. And then I have to say the major piece for me was Essence magazine in the 80s when my mother was in her 30s and 40s, and I realized that magazines captured both image, right, and words, and so there was a feeling. And I think like coming into myself as a teenager, I knew that I was a deep feeler. I always was very emotive. Like even now, I told you, like I'm a crier. This is too much. So magazines sparked a critical lens in me, but also an emotive identity something that said to me, it's okay to feel. And in essence, it was nothing but Black women's stories and Black women's hair and Black women's fashion. And I felt very compelled by that, very compelled by aspirational identity, anything that seemed like more than what I had, like higher heels and, more flights to places that I've never been. But it was a very different time in media, right? So a very, very different time because there wasn't an influx of a lot. I loved fashion my whole life. I loved models. I was tall and skinny. When it wasn't cool to be tall and skinny, to be like a 14-year-old skinny Black girl from Brooklyn, like wasn't the shit at all. And my mother was like, but you look like Iman, or whatever, And so I would try to find myself in models, which brought me a lot to the Vogues and the L's and Bazaars. I remember reading these books, these magazines when I was much younger, and I liked a lot of what I read, but I completely felt invisible. So in chasing essence, I started to chase more than just the magazine itself, but I was chasing Susan Taylor, who was the legendary editor for 30-some years, and she felt like right to me. Like she was a spiritual person in the world, and then the storytelling was a piece of that, of what her identity was, of what it meant to be Susan in the world. The storytelling came with it, and I wanted to mimic that. And then there was also editors before her, as I had mentioned, my feminism, even before I called it such, was clamoring at my spirit, my soul. Everything about me wanted to stand up for girls. And there were editors at Essence, I think about Marsha Ann Gillespie, I think about Black feminists who were tackling media, because the two don't really go together very well when you think about what it means to be a person who fights for Black women and then institutions who have spent their entire existence pushing Black women down, right? So there was something to reconcile in that, and I think Essence was the first time that it was kind of solidified for me and made real that there was a path where there could be fashion and there could be images and there could be words and stories all centered around Black women. So that's how I really found myself in it. I was a mass media major too. That's the other thing. I was a journalism student. I was Emil Wilbekin, some of you will know him. He was the editor-in-chief of the Hampton Script when I was a freshman and sophomore, and he would prance across campus all fabulous with a ponytail, and I was like, I just love it. And he was like, well, you've got something going on too, sis. So we just saw each other, And then he told me he was doing this work, and he was like, you should come down to the Script. You should come down to the Script. You should come down to the Script. And one day I did, and that's all she wrote. My first byline was at the Hampton Script, and I never stopped enjoying that sensation. By Kieran Mayo, I have an idea, and I'm gonna share it with the world.
Yeah.
Little Black girl me from Brooklyn, yes, here for it, and built a whole life around that.
Love it.
I had 3 minutes to come up with a really good answer, and then I was caught up in Kieran's answer. I think two things about me have been consistent throughout my lifetime, which is one, I'm a very big know-it-all, and two, I really love to, forget my language, but pop my shit, right? And so, as I've grown up, I've realized that the united themes between those two really just come down to a sense of curiosity, right? I'm really invested in wanting to know more and realizing how much I don't know and trying to find other things that, the fleshy material that seems unclear. When I was in school, I remember the first book I ever read, a long non-fiction book by a Black author, was Toni Morrison's Sula, and that was my favorite book for years, which reading Toni Morrison repeatedly is a little bit of a labor, but I could not stop just trying to understand new parts of Black life. As I started to pay attention to media, the actual mainstream representations of it, I was in high school and I took a journalism class, and at that time, it was a really confusing time for me. I grew up in Harlem. My high school experience was the first time I went to school with other non-Black and Latinx kids, And like what they were teaching me about the stories to read about journalism was just not what I knew about my life, right? You know, they're writing about hip hop getting trendy. This is like the late 90s, early aughts, right? And, you know, I'm like, this is not what I see on 2/5 every day, right? This is not what I see when I go to the record. Like, but as, you know, I found a space to be able to really talk more and find my voice, I realized I could just say what I feel about what I see and what I think matters to me, right? And so I actually didn't go to journalism school, but I had a laptop and a lot of time. And so, you know, I was coming up in the blog era, right? I was arguing with people in comment sections, doing 3-paragraph long comments in Two Dope Boys comment section, talking about Tyrone Ayomari and talking about the new album releases and why this person is interesting. I remember when Nicki Minaj first broke into the blog scene and people were talking about, is she gonna have, you know, staying power? What's interesting about her, right? And knowing all the girls I knew who had pink wigs and bangs and were rocking it out and understanding what this really felt like and you knowing what would come from that, right? And I realized, like, I'm writing these like 4-paragraph long, you know, missives in response to like a troll comment, and friends are hitting me up like, yo, you could just write this yourself, right? Just pitch it and start to write it. And that's how I started to make that pivot into really caring about the craft and emulating people that had been reading all the time, right? That was, I can't believe I'm saying this, but like almost 15 years ago, right? But like now, you know, it's really something that has really stood by me the test of time, like to consistently be curious, to always go into a story wondering what you're actually gonna get out of it, you know, really view it as a place to explore and tell something that's interesting, something that's unique, and something that only you can tell, right? You know, there's a lot of people who write about Black culture in New York media. There's not many people who grew up in colonial houses, right, who could talk about what actually is in the streets, right? A lot of people who can come at you from a perspective of, oh, this is what is relevant, this is what is, you know, the metrics on the charts, but not a lot of people who connect with the people who you sit across when you talk to them about their life and what they find interesting, what they find valuable, how they want to be heard and seen, and why it's relevant. And once I realized that, like, I had that piece of me to offer, as well as just caring so much as a woman who's had to argue with guys about, you know, creating my space. I've been doing that since I was 5, right? So doing that in the media space was nothing, right? Just really coming into that space and saying, we have something to say, we have stories to be told, and we have the right to tell them properly.
I associate similarly like so much of storytelling with like curiosity, and I was just like a quiet, very quiet, observant kid. So a lot of my interest in storytelling just came from watching people and also like wanting to know how the world works. And just like, why does this, you know, I was like kind of always internally asking questions, just kind of, you know, why is it this way? Why does it have to be this way? Or just kind of why, you know, like, why does the world kind of like work in these ways that just kind of don't make sense? So I think, you know, like when I think about it and break it down, like a lot of my storytelling, I guess like savvy or just like interest came from asking questions, or just like asking a lot of questions. Being a library kid, I was every weekend in the library. So my family came over from Guyana, and you know, my dad was always, we were, you know, basically assimilating into like American culture. Went from Brooklyn to Queens, and a lot of my interest in music came from my dad, who would always just be playing like every type of American music. It was like the Michael Jacksons, Madonna, Whitney. Like I remember flipping through his records and vinyls and just kind of being curious about, you know, all these songs that would come on from like the Sam Cookes and Percy Sledge, and really listening to the storytelling in those songs. And I think I just kind of gravitated to just rhythm and just kind of like melody and what it meant to kind of move through the world, almost like float through the world a little bit. And especially as a kid who was just extremely shy, like it was, I didn't know what to do with words, or I just didn't know how to kind of navigate words, at least verbally. And I think I found a way to do it through writing, and found a way to kind of find myself through writing and figure out what I wanted to say, because I didn't know how to like verbalize like my feelings and emotions. And a lot of it came out through like diary. Like I still have diaries that I had when I was like a teenager. I have like 2 of them. I got really bad poems that I wrote that were just like terrible. I would just write down lyrics. I think all of us probably were like writing down lyrics before the age of, you know, genius. And like Ola, you know, .com if you go back that far. Yeah. And I kind of discovered hip hop on my own. Like I discovered music through my dad, and then hip hop through my sister, who had like Missy Elliott tapes, cassette tapes, and Lil Kim. And so I think there was some association with like what does it mean to kind of like tell a story? What does it mean to be the character in your story? I saw a lot of like just relationship between fiction that I was reading and like my own life, and I would look for myself in stories a lot. I would look for myself in magazines and not find myself in the 17s of the world. And then when I picked up, Jet or Essence or like Honey and, Vibe, I was like, oh, this is me. And like, this is my world. And, very incidentally, I just kind of like figured or realized that I could write the worlds that I wanted to kind of be in. I kind of started out undecided in college. I went to Temple for like a year, and then from there, transferred to NYU and kind of just like fell into journalism. Like I didn't have a plan to be a writer. It was just something that was a bit intuitive. And I think a lot of us probably, our storytelling comes from curiosity and just comes from trying to figure things out. And I have the know-it-all spirit also, where I want to know everything. So yeah, that's kind of like in a nutshell, just where the, I guess impetus to kind of just tell stories comes from. I think a lot of it is music is storytelling. Like we look at our parents and we kind of like are really intrigued by their stories and how they got, like how they kind of, I also think like stories are always evolving. Like the story I know about my mom from when I was 10 years old is so different than what I know about her today. And like how that, like it's such a there's more shades and layers, and like I just understand her more. And, I think that is always interesting, that a story can evolve from, like throughout the ages, and we have that kind of responsibility to shape all of those,
Absolutely, yeah. I love how each one of you touched on curiosity and creating space, because there's a quote that I have tacked up on a Post-it note at whatever desk I'm ever at, and it's attributed to James Baldwin: "The place in which I'll fit will not exist until I make it." Mm-hmm. And I think about that every time I put out a byline, or I put out a podcast, or I work on anything. It's like, who am I creating space for? And all of y'all have done that in your career. And being a woman and covering an art form that historically didn't have a lot of space for women to cover it, y'all have all done essential work to create space in continuums for yourself and for future generations. So here, Clover, I'll start with you for this one. Can you think back to the first moment where you made space for yourself in your work?
Yeah, I guess like going back to the, like just kind of being not the loudest voice in the room. Like I, definitely interviewing as a journalist was always a source of anxiety for me, because it was like having to not only be in front of like these kind of big figures, but, come with a certain amount of kind of, yourself, like you bring yourself to the interview. So I go kind of like way, way back. Like the first story that made me feel like I could actually do this, and that I had, that I could like make space for myself, was an interview that I did with Benzino for allhiphop.com. So when I was studying journalism, I was studying journalism at NYU, and it was like my last year. I had I had like 3 internships at Amsterdam News, Vibe, and then like New York Newsday that I was juggling at the same time. It was like, one a week, whatever, or 1 day per week, whatever. And I was also writing for allhiphop.com, and, kind of putting out news stories like in between going to class, just kind of like, it was a lot of aggregating and stuff. And I got this was around the time, Kim Osorio was suing, a source for sexual harassment and just gender discrimination. Sydney, you did the episode for
Louder
Than
and wrongful
Riot.
termination and defamation.
Yeah,
yes.
and it was kind of the episode that like she did for just for NPR was about that lawsuit and just kind of the like kind of like it being like a Me Too sort of a Miss Me Too moment. So I interviewed him, like it was like around that time. It was about, I think mid 2000s or whatever. And I just remember doing that. I kind of approached the interview. It was a phone interview, and I was just kind of like, I have questions that I need to ask. And I was so green. I mean, I was like 21 or 2 or something like that, or 21. And like, it was intimidating. It was just kind of like an intimidating, especially for me as somebody who, like, I wasn't used to dealing with personalities, and I wasn't used to dealing with such like serious topics, like in this realm. But I did try to kind of like stand my ground and just ask questions. And it was the first time I felt like, oh, I could do this and kind of feel confident and also not let somebody kind of like intimidate me into not asking questions. And I felt like I could be critical and that I could kind of like, basically, like that I had a job, and that like that kind of superseded whatever anxiety or whatever kind of like intimidation that I felt. And so I did that interview, it got published, and then the next day I went into the Vibe office and like people started clapping, and I was like, this is like crazy. It was just kind of like an accomplishment of just being challenged by something and then kind of facing it head on and, like asking the difficult questions basically. And, like that was a moment where I was like, oh, okay, I can have like space in the room and feel like my voice matters in some way. And, like it also just, it just kind of like gave me the sort of kind of like injection of like confidence. And, maybe some Vibe editors are here that were like there that day, but if you were, like, it meant a lot to me, because I felt like, it was, I guess like when you say empowering, that like that is really like literally what it was,
Wow.
And, I think some of us know how Benzino was, so.
I'm struggling to think of the first time, but I can think of just a time, right, where I really felt like, okay, I'm doing this right. Now it's about 4.5 years ago. So just yesterday was like the 4-year anniversary of Pop Smoke passing, and I interviewed him for Fader, right? Landed a profile, talked about, going to Philippe Chow's, because everyone loves to go sit at Philippe Chow's to interview rappers, right? And I was like, okay, this is right around the time where he was blowing up everywhere. Meet the Woo was everywhere. You couldn't go to a party without hearing Welcome to the Party. The remix just dropped with Nicki. Like, he was ubiquitous at this point. He had kind of just broken past the New York limitation. Power 105 was playing him, so it was getting real for him. And I really wanted to be able to tell a story about, a kid from Canarsie who just rocketed to like huge fame in a really short amount of time, who's like a disciple of like a child of 50 Cent and DMX, right? Like, for this new iteration, and really trying to explain like how these stories come full circle, where now his whole community is looking at him as like the next coming of great talent, but also that the musical sound is actually a story of Black history, right? And trying to get my editors to understand that. My editor was not Black at the time, and really trying to explain like, this is a Chicago story and a London story, because they're bringing London beats in, and the London connection matters because it's like Black Caribbeans from Canarsie and Flatbush who are connecting with Black Caribbeans in London, and that's how this sound is accelerating. And it was a big fight to really like kind of keep the lead in, right? And really get people to understand like all these different pieces, and not just, oh, here's this new drill artist, and right now the cops are trying to shut down all the drill concerts, right? And really working to make sure that Pop felt heard, his people felt heard, really understanding like what it means to be able to understand how to have the power of your voice as an instrument, right? Now all the drill effects that everybody knows that are signature, he was, really using his vocals as an instrument in that way. And also just really getting people to understand that at the end of the day, these are like really young kids. Like, Pop never made it to 21, and really understanding that these are people who are put on these international platforms for the first time. and really selling that story and it coming together, and Pop's people reaching out to me saying they, really felt heard and appreciated, and his fans. My younger brother does not read anything I do, right? He's like, you do all that other stuff, that's cool, right? But he read it, he shared it with his friends, and he was like, this is what this youth movement is about. That was like one of the big moments where I was like, I got this right. I really sat there and pulled the story together well. And it really also helped me set a standard for like what bar I want to reach when I tell other people's stories, right? How do I bring in the whole context? How do I feel able to create a space where like somebody who looks at me and calls me miss, right? Because I'm an elder to people like him, right? Is willing to get comfortable and talk about their real fears as they're coming up into a new level of visibility. And that's what I realized, both like the power that is in that and also like the responsibility that comes with, right? That, these young people don't tell everybody the inner parts of their life and how it can really impact to like change that onto the page.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm so into these stories. Benzino, wow. Like, hats off.
Right.
Just say
Hung
that.
up on me, or I had to hang up on him, actually.
Okay, so then that's the same Benzino. Okay. And just, it's really remarkable to hear women who are a generation behind me have such similar kinds of stories, though, wow, it's a moment for me on a few levels here. So the first time I felt like I made space for myself, those Hampton script editorials, if you will, were important to me. I was tracked to go into print journalism, which at the time meant newspaper. And I was a big NABJ girl, and but couldn't find a paper that felt like they understood the perspective that I had on the world. And my editorials at the Hampton Script all started with, "Greetings, brothers and sisters," which explained why I didn't get the internship at the Post or the Times, or any of those other places. But brothers and sisters mattered to me, and continued to matter to me even as I tried to dream a world and tried to dream a career which, unlike these women on the stage, hadn't been modeled for me in the world of hip hop. So flash forward to the source, there are two things that stand out to me. One was when I was walking around with the tape that Puffy, who drove up to the office in his Volkswagen, dropped off Mary J. Blige's What's the 411? That was in my pocket. And the guys at the source, and I was at the source like 1.0 or like 1.5. Like the source had started in Boston, but the early source in New York was very, very early. And at that time, I was really the only woman on staff after Dream Hampton left. But when I had this tape and I'm listening to Mary, I'm like, some shit's happening. It's called Mary J. Blige. But to get the guys in the office to really pay attention to a woman was more than a notion. It just wasn't the thing. So I managed to squeeze like a 300-word piece on Mary's What's the 411 in our, I don't know, was it a record review or singles review, some section in the magazine. And I remember you talking about being shy, like Mary and I were both 21, we were both like staring at the floor, like talking to each other, but looking at the ground. There was just nerves in the room, but I knew she was special. And even if I was the only person in that office who knew something was happening, I knew it to be true and I couldn't turn away from it. And in those 300 words, because a lot of the stuff I've written just simply does not stand up. But one thing I said about her was, she will be to our generation what Aretha Franklin was to our mothers, or something like that. And in the next few months, they started calling her the queen of hip hop soul. That was clearly from that little piece that I wrote. And when I saw that, I was like, they're responding to me.
Yeah.
They're responding to me. And so that
The
like,
art being in conversation
yes.
with it. Yep.
So that definitely put a battery in my back. The other time was when I wrote an open letter to an artist at the time. He pronounces his name Akinyele. It's spelled Akinyele. I'm not going to tell the brother how to pronounce his own name. But I will tell him what he won't be saying on wax about black girls. And he had written this song. The album was called Vagina Diner. There was a song called Laha. And in the lyrics, I mean, it was just violent against black girl, black girl, black girl, black girl. But there's this one lyric where he talks about throwing a pregnant girl down a flight of stairs. And I don't know, it was like my enough, you know, because already in hip hop there was enough. There was enough to respond to. But that was my personal like, what, yo? And I was feeling very Onyx. I was feeling very like, bitch ass. So I put it on the page. Now, I wouldn't do it the same way, obviously, but the gumption that it took to have an open letter to this artist who was just coming out with his debut album, but he was celebrated in a very core group of producers that were recognized and respected and were part of a crew who was attached to one of my dear friends. Sorry, a lot of people here that know me know that I went to high school with a Tribe Called Quest, and Q-Tip was one of my first friends and like one of my besties. So anyone attached to that world, I was inclined to be favorable about. But this person and his lyrics were just so violent and just so out of pocket that I couldn't take it. So I wrote this open letter, and it was really aggressive, and it was very direct, and it ran on like page 4 or something. And he ended up losing his record deal, and it was a lot of fallout from it. I recognized that I had a purpose because people were really responding to me. I'd been at the source for months, maybe even a year at that point, but I had yet to kind of find what I would be known for. And when I realized that like fighting for women and fighting for girls was actually a beat, I was all over it. So that was definitely the time that I made space for myself. And I want to think for a lot of other people, including the men that I worked with, the men that were in the culture behind the music, and the men that were a part of that project, because they all recognized that we had reached a point where there was going to be a response, and that the misogyny could not just exist without an answer. So yeah, I would say those were my two.
Yeah. And it was not only a beat, you made it a magazine, Honey Magazine. Can we talk about that?
Okay, so that happened.
Okay, so that happened.
So Honey happened a few years after that, for the same reasons though, like still just wanting a girls club. And don't get me wrong, my years at the Source, before the Source was even like popped off in the way that it would be years after I'd left, because hip hop would be popped off in a way that it wasn't, you know, in the early 90s. It just, I don't know, that time was one where I was growing. We were all growing. We were very young people discovering ourselves, discovering our relationship to this culture, and also discovering that we were media. There's a certain power that came with that, but we recognized that we didn't have the same power that white media had. So we were fighting against the systems, many systems, but also fighting with each other because we were being public intellectuals for the first time. We were testing our ideas against each other. And again, being the only woman in the room wasn't always easy, but it also wasn't always hard. I would say that I was needed, I was welcomed, I was loved, I was protected in some respects, if not fully understood. And even though the men that I made my version of the source with were still reconciling their own misogyny, you know. I think things were just being named. We were just starting to call a thing by its name. And it was like a shock for a lot of the young men in particular. But we grew, and out of that came Honey. Because in my years there, I realized that even with all of that love, I still wasn't home. The conversation with the brothers was not, and the non-brothers, but the men folk, was not the same as the conversation I was having in the company of my sisters. The critical conversation, the hurting conversation, like all of it, none of it rose to the level that I needed for my own sustenance. And again, I tell you, I had been this like Essence devotee, and I knew that that magazine did not exist for women of my generation. It did not, and when I say my generation, the dividing line, the distinction I'm making is hip hop.
Hip hop generation, yeah. Because there was
we were the
black
first
women's
ones.
magazines, there were
Yes.
hip hop magazines, there was not both.
And my generation is really the first generation. So like my mother is in hip hop, but my kids are hip, like their mother is hip hop. So we were kind of the first generation that didn't have our mothers to really turn to. We couldn't really turn to Essence to have a take on how to take this thing on that we're very much a part of. Like I was as much hip hop as any guy in the office, but at the same time, I had a perspective that I knew I needed women to help me exact, and I needed their cosign as audience. And so Honey happened because I was able to see that you didn't have to be a 65-year-old white person to publish, right? In the example of everyone in the office being under 25, from the publisher down to the intern, I realized that we didn't have to wait until we were grown to do this. And the other thing was just knowing that I have on my Timbs and my red lipstick, and there's a gang of us. We need a place. We need a place. And that's really how Honey kind of came to be. My bestie from college, Joycelyn Dingle, who had already been working on a magazine idea, was like, are you ready now? Because I had finally like had those years at the Source, and I think I brought kind of material knowledge about how to make a magazine. And she had the fervor to knock on doors and to get rejected by all those doors, but to knock on them anyway. And then we were besties, and not for nothing, sisterhood is a mighty, mighty well. It's a source. It's a thing to pull from. And that gave us permission, like the comfort of friendship, the mission that we had, and the knowledge base that I had just on how to do this thing. So Honey, yeah.
And we're absolutely going to touch on sisterhood and community later in the conversation. I love how we're getting into specific bylines and pivotal moments and moments where we pushed ourselves or just like push that pen, because I distinctly remember that Pop Smoke piece. But in the words of one of our organizers, Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, let's get even more juicy and specific, okay? Because there's a lot of journalism students out here who need to know, what are the elements of a fire pitch? Shamira, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the key things to really develop a voice right now is to really resist being reactive, right? I think we're in an era prompted by social media, digital media, 24-hour news cycles, where the impetus is really to have a reaction to what you saw right now, whether it be on Twitter or TikTok or wherever it may have played out, right? You know, somebody puts up a video when something wild is happening, and we have to have that quick take about, 1,000 words or less about what was happening. And I'm not knocking anybody that does that. It's a necessary industry, and also it's a good skill to have to be able to generate insights in a couple of hours. But I think one thing that really speaks to how you can really have a voice that resonates is really figuring out how to draw it out to the bigger issues, the bigger local issues that are accessible to everybody that will meet them where they are, right? So to give an example, a lot of hype was being had around AI and hip hop. Is, will people buy a Kendrick album if you can do AI Kendrick, right? Or the AI Drake track that went viral, and everyone's really obsessed over these leaked AI covers, and that's just one of like 17 million different uses of the technology, right? And when you sit there and you talk about it, and you really want to go and speak to an editor at the Washington Post about it or wherever, you really have to give the hook of, okay, at the end of the day, the trendy AI app is gonna move, right? No matter what. Like, everything moves really quickly. By the time you publish, it might not be this app, it might be a different one, right? But what at the core of this conversation is labor, right? We're talking about loss of labor, right? Being operationalized by saying we can do this via a computer. And not only that, it's saying that art can be operationalized and put into formulas, and that the thing that really doesn't, make you wake up and sit up is the way that Kendrick's voice cracks when you hear him rap on All Right. You know what I mean? Like the small things, those imperfections that make it human, that make it raw, that make it elemental. And so what I have found, no matter what the topic is, no matter what you're responding to or writing, is one, think about what is that evergreen conversation that goes cross-generationally, right? My mom doesn't really listen to rap like that. That's not her space. She's not in the hip-hop generation. But she does care about labor. She does care about valuing Black space. She does care about valuing our time and the effort we put into everything. And that goes across Black creative industries, right? So how do you find a way to show this is why this matters? This is why people will show up. A lot of times when you are a Black woman selling a pitch about Black culture, you have to sell who's going to read this, right? What's the marketability of this? What makes this relevant to greater demographics? Because apparently Black people don't read, if editors haven't told you, right? And how do you show them, like, this is what is actually materially interesting about it. This is what the story really is about, right? And yes, you can use whatever peg you want, but at the end of the day, it's Black time, Black labor, Black stories matter, and this is an example of how we have to actually correct that narrative.
That was that was I guess I don't know if I can speak to recent. Knock on wood, I haven't had to pitch in in a minute, but maybe from like the editor standpoint, like from recent times, I do think there's voice and then obviously like angle and perspective. There's so many different voices out there, and there's voices out there that aren't, they may have kind of like perspective, but not necessarily context and like cultural reference, which is just to say that like there is some, like if you're a historian or like you're kind of like an amateur historian or you're like a lover of the culture and you have all this knowledge that's kind of stored that is just kind of from years or kind of like however many years of just kind of being a observer or fan of the culture itself, then you bring that into the pitch or you bring that into the story. And there are a lot of people who approach it from like outsider's perspective, or they're not kind of like in it, or they're not like, not to use like immersed again, but like, like immersed in that space. And if you have kind of like a specific like just kind of like cultural like reference point that you're coming from, whether it is, like an immigrant story or like a labor like intensive story or something that takes it out of just kind of that general space, especially in this age where journalism is so accessible in a way that anybody feels like they can write, basically. Like pretty much anybody can pitch something, or anybody can kind of like come to an editor or just kind of come into the space with a good idea. But I think a fire pitch has that kind of human element or human interest element. It has that emotion behind it, and it has some historical kind of context and reference point that comes from living. I really don't think you can replace the immediacy or just kind of like you can't replace kind of like actually living in something or kind of being part of it. And I feel like if you can bring that to like a story idea, then that separates it or distinguishes it from just kind of a general story about a topic, I don't know if that makes sense, but like just like the idea of just like being in something, being in the culture, whatever that means to you, and bringing context. And you know, I think we all can kind of be like maybe like amateur historians in a way. And, you know I have always been interested in just kind of an encyclopedic kind of like knowledge of music and hip hop and genres, and you know, so yeah, I think just bring that into like the idea, like that always helps. Sorry if that's not like specific.
No, it makes
Like,
sense. To know it, you gotta know it. You gotta go. You gotta be of it.
Yeah.
Kiana, what about you?
No, that's the most salient thing. Like I need to believe you. Like you have to be the best knower. You have to know this material, and you need to show up as a reader on the page. When you write, we need to know that you read. We need to know that you read. So if you're pitching, this is to any journalism student, if you're pitching said publication, you need to know said publication. You need to know their flaws. You need to know their hits. You need to understand when and where you enter and what the possibility is, but you can't do that if you're not engaged. And most editors can almost sense that in how you approach. Because when there's familiarity, there is fluid nature to how you express yourself and how you express what you think is important. Because as an editor, this is even true as an editor of books, but as an editor of anything, you want people who make you look good. You need smart people to make you smarter. And you can't necessarily do what they do. You're counting on them to come through the door with the next big idea, with the best written next big idea, with the big idea that you are the expert at, you the writer, you the pitcher. So you work hard in being knowledgeable and confident in that knowledge. And if you have a perspective that has yet to be shared, even better. But stand on it, and stand on it on the page, and be pithy when you can. Like, longer is not always better. Sometimes if you can write short but effectively, if you can be punchy but clear, those kind of basic things that you learn like in 101, day one, they really hold true throughout your entire career as a writer and journalist.
Yeah, I agree. And getting into the current industry, the current atmosphere of media, of not just hip hop journalism, not just music journalism, but just journalism and media right now. It's an influx time. It's, kind of woozy, kind of, some say with unstable, with the changes at places like MTV News, Jezebel, Pitchfork, ESPN, LA Times.
We could be here for a long time.
I could keep going. But what are some of y'all sources of inspiration now? Like, what are you reading, listening to, just checking for that is really piquing your curiosity now and making you feel like we still have stories to tell. We have new ways to tell those stories.
Well, I definitely don't have a great answer for that. I've divested, I'd say the past 3 to 6 months, I've been going back to the archives. I've not been playing keep up with the Joneses, even in terms of what's being written today, but also just these media platforms. I'm just kind of done with them. They don't excite me personally on a lot of levels, but I also have a tremendous amount of burnout. I have a tremendous amount of resentment. I have a tremendous amount of shit I have to work through to even engage platforms today in the way that I did, say, when I was the editor-in-chief of Ebony or running ebony.com, and it was an all-day, everyday thing, and I didn't miss anyone's drop ever. Now I'm burdened with my own personal issues that leave me feeling uninspired by that world, and also taxed by an industry that I don't feel I got mine out of. And I'm not invested enough anymore at this stage of my career to try hard in that respect. In terms of like, let's just take the brands that you mentioned, and then the other 10. Like, if you call me today, like they all did in 2020, every single magazine I ever wanted to work at, every single place I ever had a dream about, that I was invisible to for 25 straight years, wanted to offer me the sky and the moon. But I'm just not there anymore. So I'll let them answer that question in a less like offended. But that's the space I'm in. That's that, and that's also.
Is there anything in the literary world, in the film world, television, Web3? It doesn't just need to be these legacy names that are crumbling and.
Well, I just saw American Fiction. And yeah, right?
Yeah. Written by a journalist.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. And that reminds me that my generation, we dope. Like, we actually transform, right? We don't get stuck in a particular industry, in a particular lane, because the lens on storytelling is long if you let it be. And what we learned in those early hip hop years was that you can't wait for 25 years for someone to like ordain you, to say it's okay. Like sometimes you have to kick in the door. And I think that that's probably the most hopeful space for us now, is like screenwriting and directing. And like when I look at Dream's career, who is like one of my best friends from my early career, but I just love her trajectory because nothing's linear. Like nothing in this game, if I wanted it to be a straight line, which for many years I did, it couldn't be. There weren't, those opportunities just weren't there. Like I'm so happy about what's happened at places, at establishment places that I won't name, but like the brilliant Black people that are here that contribute to those places have made them and this country so much better, so much richer. But my own personal journey has been one that has left me with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, I have to say. So yeah, it's just, I'm only inspired by either people that I know directly and I see them doing their thing in other spaces, because the institutions themselves, like, you miss me, all of them, all of them. Yeah, sorry.
It's real, that's real.
I mean, it's not like,
It's okay.
okay.
I mean, I think what Kierna brings up is really valid. You know, right now, you know, the soft and mushy era of everyone getting the DEI contacts is over, right? You know, and I find myself increasingly, when I have younger writers reach out to me and talk to me about how to build a life as a full-time writer, I don't necessarily have the answer for them, right? You know, the pay is less and less, the stability is eliminating, right? A lot of the people who, you know, make a living off of what is effectively a working class career, because there are jobs that pay, but they ain't that many, right? You know, they have people that help them financially, or they have resources that help them stabilize throughout it, and you find out that no one's really talking about it until you ask a question, like the New Yorker, like, oh, how much is your rent? How are you affording a $3,000 apartment on a, you know, contributed salary, right? And the math doesn't math up, right? But regardless, you know, one thing that does keep me grounded, as dispiriting as all that is, as hard as it is to really encourage young writers to keep pushing, is the people around me in my circle who continue to find ways to innovate and like push themselves into a space, even though like the gate was locked off, right? Find new ways to meet people where they are, right? You know, while we're here, our panelists, you know, our host, Sydney, who had an amazing podcast telling great hip hop stories that mattered throughout the last 20 years, you know, talking about everything from The Source to, you know, talking about queer artists who were getting visible, right? And that era of what it means to be a Black queer hip hop artist, right? You know, I have, you know, friends like Tim Hotep, who I think might be here, you know, who also did a podcast documenting the blog era, right? And really giving life to that, as well as creating platforms to Pitchfork like Levels, RIP, you know, really giving us space to really examine our stories, right? I know people that do on-air content, like my friend Iviani, who is a great writer and editor and who moved over to doing a lot of on-camera content because people listen to stories even if they're not reading them, right? You know, you have Clover, who wrote an amazing book about women in hip-hop, right? And continue to find ways to, you know, give life to people's stories, because one of the things about documenting the story of hip-hop is that there's like, the idea that it's youth culture really means that everyone has this recency bias, as opposed to thinking about the people that helped found it, the people that helped build that infrastructure, and giving them the space to tell their stories as well. And Clover did a great job with that book doing that. And so realizing that no matter how many doors are closed off to us, people really have the tenacity to find different ways, right, to really build up a platform, to really make their voices heard, make other people's voices heard. And it's not easy, right? Like, I'm not gonna pretend I wake up every day, you know, raring to go, being like, oh, I'm on it. No, I take a lot of naps, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of emails and group chats, texts being like, yo, is this editor bugging, or, you know, am I, you know, losing my mind here, right? Before the story goes live, right? But 4 days where I'm like, yo, I'm really out of this business. I'm gonna go corporate, I'm done, right? There's like the 5th day where you're like, yo, somebody dead emailed me saying like, what I did was important, what I did mattered, right? And we all find different and innovative spaces to really try to capture that magic.
Yeah, I used to jump off that. I was just talking about how there was this kind of drop off, or this maybe like gap in just generations of writers from maybe like the Source Vibe, Double XL kind of peak era to the blog era, and people who maybe kind of made or tried making that transition, you know, like there was just kind of like some sort of gap where, you know, pre-blog, I guess like mid to late 2000s, it was if you weren't online or if you weren't on social media, then you probably kind of transitioned out of just like traditional print media. Like, you know, TV, it's lucrative, was and still is, and, you know, audio, or like just audio-visual space. And so like actually, you know, finding inspiration has just changed so much in the past, just like several years. I think I was maybe fortunate to be a little bit in between the like print and digital kind of just like transition, just kind of coming from a magazine world, but then being part of like the very, very early rap blog era, and just like the early like blog era, and then being at Jezebel during that like super peak, like you know, where you could actually make money writing for a blog, or just writing for like a like, you know, like a Jezebel with Gawker. So, you know, like I think you know, I teach at NYU journalism school, and it's kind of like increasingly harder or challenging, I guess, to like, you know, be optimistic, but then also kind of realistic about like this industry and just how it's changing. But especially for like the younger, you know, like the younger Black students who kind of like come in and want to write about music, want to write about the music that they care about, and they're always just kind of like, well, where do I pitch this story? Or just like, where do I, you know, where can I like fit in or like find space? And, you know, it is hard with the kind of fading out of, you know, like the democratization of like, you know, hip hop coverage basically. So now it's all spread out, and it's the GQs of the world and the New York Times, and like you know, like now there's a Cameron feature in GQ that would have been like somewhere else, you know, before. So, so, you know, like it's finding, I know that like the younger people is not maybe like as easy to, younger writers, not as easy to kind of just place things or place, you know, but I am inspired by particularly like younger Black women voices who are creating space, like we were talking about earlier. Like Shamira wrote a great piece for The Cut about women in hip hop, and just, you know, like how, yeah, and just kind of like how we talk about women in hip hop and how these conversations kind of like women rappers and, you know, like it's almost like recycling conversations. So how do we find new ways to kind of like talk about it? And I really did like love the NPR series for Louder Than a Riot that was, you know, giving space to women like MC Shaw Rock, who like just kind of one of the earliest, you know, like women pioneers in hip hop, who just is really getting like some shine now that I like. It's really kind of inspiring to see that she feels heard in this way, and like not just heard but seen. And so you know, like you know, like other writers like Brooklyn White and Jira, who did like for Pop Sugar, you know, like a series on like women journalists and just women in hip hop. So when I see that, I am inspired by like, you know, there are people kind of taking up this mantle of covering, being a representative for like the voices who kind of like may not feel like they have a platform, basically, or even voices for people who have a platform, like a Megan Thee Stallion, who one of the biggest artists, rappers in the world, musicians in the world, and still kind of needs people to champion her, or like needs like writers to kind of write like, hey, like she's kind of still facing the same issues that women from 20 years ago were facing, and you need people, you know, like yourself, and like people to like kind of tell those stories. Like it's out there. It's just like it is challenging. Like it is, and hopefully like maybe everybody in this room kind of finds ways to encourage, if you do come across like, you know, younger writers, encourage them to kind of like keep going. Or like maybe create their own kind of spaces in some way, or maybe somebody create a honey of this, you know, like generation, and really kind of, because that is what it takes. Like, you know, like we had to do it, you know, kind of ourselves, and like plant the flags, or whatever. So.
And it really is a continuum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think, sorry to cut you off, I think one thing that keeps me grounded as well is that so many of these conversations are not new, right? Just like Karen was talking about her early days of the source, right? You know, I try to mix up my contemporary thoughts with just revisiting what, you know, the Audre Lordes, the Bell Hooks, the Toni Morrisons were saying as well when they were charting out their space as, you know, contemporary American thinkers and writers. And I remember when they reissued Black Women Writers at Work, a great text, which I recommend everybody read if you haven't already. And the conversation they were having about what is it like being a Black woman, charting out this space for yourself, not just in a misogynist world, but, you know, even in Black spaces, you know, the predominant thinkers are men. What does it mean that, you know, this is around the time when, you know, Michelle Wallace did Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, and how does this conversation be relevant? How do we feel about it? Really asserting our space. And it's just the same conversation that we're having 40 years later. You know, it has evolved, met different needs, but we've constantly been antagonizing and pushing and demanding that we hold ourselves accountable for demanding the space that we want. And I think that also reaffirms me that, you know, we're in the path of the people that we idolize and respect, and we just have to continue charting that path.
Yes. Ooh, that part. All right, I have many more questions, but we do want to open it up to the audience. And, oh, I'm sorry, we do not have time to open it up to the audience. Sorry, y'all. We spent too much time up here. Thank you once again to our panelists, Kieran Mayo, Shamira Ibrahim, and Clover Holt. All right, we're good?
Are we done?
Yeah, we good.
Hold up, before you start going, can we show our appreciation for this panel one more time? So we have another panel after this one you may be aware of. And so also I want to make sure I say, because Novella Ford wasn't in the room before, we make sure she's here to hear our shout out and our gratitude to the Schomburg Center for partnering with us. I'll say that this conversation is exactly why, it is everything that we wanted. when we were conceptualizing this event. And we're fortunate enough to have another one coming right up in about 5 minutes, and that will be a conversation between the Grammy Award-winning rapper, actor, producer, and playwright and author, Tariq Black Thought Trotter, who, as everyone knows, is the lead vocalist. Everyone in this room knows is the lead vocalist for the legendary Roots. And I'm reading all this stuff like I don't know it. And so when I introduced Tariq a couple of months ago at Columbia when he did an event, I simply said a resident of everyone's top 5 list who's worth listening to at all. So you have a top 5 list and Tariq is not in it. And I'm kind of, the other 4 people on your list, the whole list is suspect to me now. And he will be in conversation. I can tell you, like, he'll be in conversation with Chris X. One of the things that we wanted to do was have the actual exchange of artist and critic. And Chris X is one of my favorite writers. And I can also take the privilege to say that one of the things, and I've said this to some of you individually, one of the things that I love about our generation, if you have any gray and you had an Afro pick with the black fist, then you're in my generation. If you, the people who are in my generation, is that we educated each other. And so very many of us learned about journalism from people who were our age, who were practitioners of it. And even people who emerged in our 30s and 40s were learning from people our same age who started out in their 20s and 30s. And I think that that's the kind of beauty of this. And so we're very pleased to have Chris X in dialogue with Tariq Trotter. And of course, he's contributed to The Source, XXL, Vibe, co-wrote 50 Cent's From Pieces to Weight, and his writing style has influenced countless writers with its mix of wit, profound observations, and colorful wordplay. All right, and so that will be coming up in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
We invite people to start taking your seats again and making your way back into the auditorium. If you know anyone who sort of made their way out, go ahead and let them know. We will get started in about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Ahem. Hi, everybody. I want to thank you all for being here. I'm blinded by the light. I'm not wearing sunglasses at night. If you all could take your seats, please. We are about to welcome two of the greatest writers of their generation, of our generation, Black Thought and Chris X in conversation. Maybe for the first, I'm going to say for the first time ever. They'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this might be the first time ever. I think this is a historic moment. All of us who are writers have such deep gratitude for the beauty of each of their writings. So give them a big round of applause and welcome Black Thought and Chris X. Thank you.
Oh wow, it's bright out here. How's it going? Can y'all hear me? All right, okay. I don't really belong up here. I'm gonna tell you that right now. I am super nervous, and one thing that you've done, Tariq, is you've been protecting me through this whole process. You've been like, nah, you got it, you're good. And when we were downstairs, you were saying that artists and critics are kind of like adversaries. You called us like nemesis, oil and water. And it brought me back to something that brought me back to a moment that was, in hindsight, very pivotal to my understanding of the relationship between the artist and the critic. And it was from your partner, from Amir. Okay. I was doing an interview with him, and it was a Roots interview. So, but you guys were doing separate interviews at the time, right. And he held the tape recorder. Okay. And I remember starting it off and saying, like, Amir always holds a tape recorder, and he has a tape recorder. He's like, I'm in control of this interview. And while we were talking, he started asking me questions about something of Rolling Stone, just something about other writers. And every time he asked me, he would stop the tape so that I would feel comfortable. Right. And that was the first time that I realized an artist protected me, because he was like, I want to give you the freedom to speak, because usually we're the ones that's like, this is off the record. And a lot of times artists will be like, is it really off the record unless you stop the tape? Yeah. And he took that into his own control. So when did that relationship change for you? Because you are one of the artists that have friendships with more writers than most people.
Yeah. I think I became friends with more writers, and just the way I engage with, the writer, the critic, changed once I sort of resigned from, interacting with, right? Like, earlier on in my career, in the Roots career, we sort of split, we would divvy up the work, right? The workload, half and half. Amir would do half the press, and then I'd do the other half, and then whatever it was mandatory for us to sort of do together, we would do, together. But yeah, there was a point, way early, still mid to, I don't even know if it was the late 90s, probably still mid 90s, where I think I just began. I lost trust. I lost a tremendous amount of trust in that dynamic, right? And I don't know. It's hard for me to even recall what story it was, who had written it, what I had said that I felt, was misquoted or whatever. I just remember the way it made me feel. And, it was a trust fall of sorts where the person writing the story didn't catch me. And that was it. And, after that, I sort of, I shut down, like just publicly answering questions about my career in the Roots. I just fell back and I let my partner sort of take the lead. And and then my friendships with the writer and with my critics began to flourish.
So when did you start paying attention to bylines and you started saying like, I know this writer or this person wrote that?
I don't know. I guess I started paying attention to who had written what review or what story. Once we signed a record deal and once we were putting out music, and so much was sort of contingent upon the way it was the way it was reviewed, right? How many mics or how many records or how many stars the composition the record received. It could make or break a career. It could be career damning in the way that a terrible opening night review for a Broadway musical could be. So yeah, but early on, once we signed the record deal and started putting out music, 93, 94, that's when I guess that the reality of that dynamic sort of presented itself to me.
Were you paying when you were, before you started making music professionally and getting the opportunity to be interviewed and reviewed, how did you view the journalistic landscape? Was that important to you to say I want to cover this, I want to have this look?
No, it wasn't as important to me as it was to my peers and to my partners. I sort of grew to understand how important it was because of how much they, energy that I saw, people around me invest into it. For me, I don't know. I think one of the most important things to me, with regards to any journalist, anybody that was covering my music or writing something about my art as a young person, was that they had a full understanding of the culture and of sort of where it was that I was coming from, and that could only be achieved by either having come up from the same mud as I, or just being that well studied, and to be that well studied, you have to have at least a certain level of you have to have a great deal of respect, right, for the art, for the culture, and for the the contribution, the proverbial contribution to sort of to then invest your time and energy into it. But yeah, if I ever got a sense that someone who was writing the story wasn't, qualified for any reason, or, if their lived experience was inauthentic, or, it didn't take much for me to sort of resign from, a writer or, a whole, I don't know, to not rock with journalists wasn't the huge thing for me. And I think that's what I arrived at, I'm just not rocking with journalists. And that's sort of how I move through life sometimes. I shot myself in the foot, I think, because it began, that was the beginning of this. People ask me now, how are you in a band where, you're the lead singer and, we always hear from the drummer. How is the drummer the front man of your band? And, that is where it began. It started 30 some odd years ago, but by design, just because, I was sort of over it. I was over, being sort of misquoted, misrepresented, and I just, I was finished with y'all.
So what brought you back into the fold?
Maturity, experience, just having, lived a life and having had a career and just having a better understanding now of how things in the world sort of work. When we signed our first record deal, I was 19, maybe I just turned 19 years old. So, though I was mature in many regards, just because I had to grow up fast, as an artist and just in this, dynamic and in the roots, the equation, that is the roots, I was still a child. So for all intents and purposes, I was a child star, so just still had a lot to learn.
Now, Jelani was saying that, you're like top 5 MC, and a couple of people I ran into here were like, oh my God, you're talking to Tariq, it's like top 5. And I think I've told you a couple of times,
Yeah.
you're one of my favorite MCs, like without question. And there's always it's weird because I'm sitting here, but I'm like a fan of yours, right? So even though
I'm a fan of yours too, bro.
Well, thank you. And when you said that a couple of times,
Yeah.
and it's always very disarming to hear that from you, because it's like, I don't know at what point I popped up on your radar.
Right.
Because we became friends, and our friendship wasn't based on, it was through a mutual friend, and we just started speaking, but I was like, I think he knows who I am.
No, I knew. I've even, through, like, we've been, friends, like friends for, maybe the past 4 years or so, right? Where we communicate, we see each other, I think more in our adult life than we ever did, back when it was, when you were, a critic and I was,
Right.
well, you know what I'm saying? Like the critic and artist of it all. But even, before we started interacting sort of off the thread, I knew that you would you were the same Chris X. Yeah. You as artists, we have our top 5s and we got our list too. At least those of us who, the introverted artists who ain't trying to come outside anyway. Like I know who I'm down to do an interview for, and like for particular reasons. So my top, I've always rocked with you as an interviewer. Harry Allen has always been a good, interviewer. I've always rocked with Dream Hampton, Bones Malone. But yeah, certain people who I just feel have a deep enough, again, who have that deep understanding and who are able to apply their own, lived experience to, the story, right? So it's always felt authentic in a different way. So yeah, you one of them ones, bro.
Oh, thank you. So what do lists mean to you when, people are throwing around the top 5? Does it mean more when Jelani or I say it, or does it mean more when MTV or the magazine says it?
MTV, a magazine, it doesn't mean anything to me. Some, rando entity on social media, it doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't matter until, someone who holds a certain amount of authority and you have to have that credence, right? If your critique has to come from a place of validity, right? So again, it just goes back to if you don't know your stuff, then it doesn't matter how opinionated you are, right? But yeah, those lists, when it's someone who I have a great deal of respect or admiration for, then yeah, that's when it holds more weight.
So were you actually reading all of the coverage of yourself, or did you?
Like back in the day?
Yeah.
I did, yeah. And this is before there was a such thing as, the comments to read, right? So yeah, I read most of those stories until somebody gave me some good advice, which is not to read them.
But you haven't had, I don't think there's been a quote unquote negative review outside of the aforementioned Broadway play. There hasn't been.
Yeah, I've had some negative reviews or some, reviews that I felt, yeah, didn't represent me as best as they could have or should have.
Can you think of any of them, or?
Nah, I mean, I'm from the school of, yesterday was yesterday, today is today. I try to, remain present. And yeah, I mean, I'm still here. Those stories, something somebody said that was negative 20 years ago, doesn't matter to me, bro. So yeah, I don't remember it, because I don't really dwell on that. I'd like to utilize my, my limited RAM for art. You know what I'm saying? So I'm preoccupied with, my current process and what I'm going to do next, and it's a very much ongoing thing for me. Storytelling and just my creative sort of existence. So that's what I'm on. That's what I think about.
Well, you talk about your RAM, and we've kind of had this discussion before where our minds work very differently, where I write something and as soon as I write it, like I forget it. Mm-hmm. And if I read it again, it's like almost reading it again for the first time.
Yeah.
And you're the exact opposite almost. Like you were at the Roots picnic last year and Eve came out.
Right.
And you like had this bar about Eve. And I was just like, where's that from? Did you write that? And you were like, oh yeah, I was like up there and I had this rhyme. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't remember it. So like you said you were on stage like kind of flicking through, like doing a Google search in your brain to find this rhyme that you had about Eve.
Right.
So, but then you turned around and you had to write this book.
Yeah.
And then writing the book, that's a totally different process of yours.
Absolutely.
So did that give you any kind of appreciation for what writers have to go through with editing and dealing
Definitely,
with
definitely. It gave me, a different, sort of depth of appreciation for what, other authors have to go through in their process, right? Just the editing, just the number of drafts and, it was a lot. It was, for me, it was soul bearing in a way that I'd never been up until that point in my music. So it was cathartic for me in a way that nothing that I'd done up until that point had been.
So what did that? What did you learn in terms of going back and looking to the relationships you've had with the works that you've seen written about you, knowing that, because you're very much, you were saying now, says you're very much like one take. You may spend a lot of time pre-rehearsing, but once you get in there, it's just like you're spitting it out.
I mean, I'm like that in the studio, right? The whole pre-rehearsal of it all. There's a lot that I work out in my mind before I'm in the booth and, trying to record a thing. I try to spend, for me the magic happens outside the booth, right? It's like before I step in, and then once, whatever I'm recording is recorded, and then I'm trying to sort of, stitch different compositions together to, to tell a greater story. That's one side of the coin. But then, I'm a lot like you in that, however long it takes to arrive at, completion of a piece. Once that piece is completed, it's almost like I banish the thought. You know what I'm saying? Unless it's something that I'm gonna need to keep close, more accessible at the ready, because I might need it for a stage performance, or if I'm not utilizing it, it's not like at the top of my sort of tool belt in that moment, then then it gets filed away, and the lines and stuff that I was looking for in that moment with Eve had been filed away for a long time because she and I hadn't seen each other or performed together for forever. I was just trying to, sort of reach back and sort of marry something old with something new. You know what I mean?
So, one of the most, and I think you have seen this through the process of the book, where there's a lot left on the table.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we often have as writers, like people, you know, we sit down, we'll talk for an hour, and then, you know, you do a piece, and usually when I do my transcriptions, they used to come out between like 50,000 to like 80,000 words.
Right.
The complete piece is going to be 3,000 to 5,000 words. And of you talking, we probably get like, if you were to take out most articles and like just read the quotes, it's usually gonna be like maybe 2 or 3 minutes out of that hour. And there was always times where people would be like, man, we talked about all this stuff, he ain't mentioned that, he ain't mentioned that, he ain't mentioned that.
Yeah, there's always so much left on the floor, right? On the table. Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you navigate, when did you learn that aspect of things that I have to say what's most important, or because you were saying, downstairs you were saying Amir kind of like goes in with a speech and he knows what, he doesn't really care what the person asks.
Yeah.
He's just, when did you learn to try to cater the conversation to get what you wanted to get across?
I think, you know, whenever it was the point at which, you know, I sort of realized that, you know, everything doesn't serve every story, you know, or, you know, every story doesn't serve, you know, every composition. So you start to think about pieces of a puzzle and how they're going to ultimately fit together at the end of the day. And, you know, those are the chunks that sort of require the most refinement. So yeah, you know, everybody can't go, right? So yeah, there's very much that is. I mean, I think, you know, there's one of the things that we as creators, you know, often have to get over, and I mean, no matter it's across multiple mediums, is what's left on the proverbial table. What is left on the cutting room floor, right? You know, whether you're a film director or a painter or an author or, you know, a seamstress, you know what I mean? Yeah, there's always so much that's left. But, you know, it just boils down to being most intentional and effective and efficient with, you know, the fabric that remains.
Now, how did you get comfortable with talking to journalists? Because I'm probably going to have to whip out my phone at some point, because I'm like, I have my notes in my phone.
Yeah.
And I remember, just because I was very disorganized, especially if I was traveling, I would have to sometimes I'd have to buy a tape recorder at the last minute. I'd have to get a new tapes and batteries and everything to record. And I remember I would whip it out, and artists would be like, you know, they're like, oh shit. And they like acting like, oh wow, it's a new tape recorder. And I have so many interviews where you hear the rapper talking about the fact that they feel impressed because there's like a new tape and new batteries, like they're taking it seriously now.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also used to write a lot of notes. I used to have a notebook, and I would ask questions. I'll be crossing things out, coming up with new questions. How does that impact you if we're talking naturally versus if I'm talking and I'm kind of like writing down, like, are you like, what did he say, or?
Well, you know, I'm not comfortable speaking with anybody. So there's that. There's always an amount of anxiety that I have to overcome in order to speak publicly to do a performance. Like, it's everything that I do is sort of an exercise in overcoming, that anxiety, that, you know, extreme introversion. So I mean, I just reach a point where it's like you just gotta say F it, right? You just gotta let go and just sort of confront your fears. And in that, because that is part of my process, at the end of whatever it is that I'm creating, at the end of whatever story it is that I'm telling, I feel that I've gotten just as much out of it as whoever I'm creating it for. You know what I mean? Like I get something out of the process in that. That's what I mean about how my work is soul feeding. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, to answer your question, I'm never comfortable talking, speaking to anybody. Yeah. So we two people out here outside who don't like to be outside. Who are in the job of essentially, speaking to folks. We don't particularly enjoy speaking to people. So yeah, that's the irony of this this whole thing.
Now, now I'm gonna have to go to my phone. I'm not doing Wordle. I have to Okay, back there we were just chatting up, and you mentioned a couple of people that you're working with. You were talking about Trevor Noah and Seth Meyers and Michael Shea and Jon Stewart. What is your relationship to those people as critics versus, or just interviewers, subjects versus the people who, like you said, came from the cloth and knew your work and knew what it meant to be raised in South Philly?
I think the Trevor Noahs, the Seth Meyers, and Michael Che's of the world, the cloth that they're cut from, I feel like they all sort of come under the Jon Stewart umbrella. And Jon Stewart is a person that I trust. I've always trusted as a journalist, as a critic, because he's been a longtime Roots supporter. He's the first person that put the Roots on TV. Back in the day, he was an upstart at MTV with the Jon Stewart show, I think. And yeah, the very first time that we ever performed, it was on his show. And since then, he's always, been a long-time supporter of the Roots and of, every endeavor. Whenever they could sort of give us a play, then they would, hire the Roots to do a thing. Or even at times when their show and the Tonight Show or Late Night Show seemed to be bumping heads. Like they were, sworn rivals at one point. It was like, Stewart versus Jimmy Fallon, but they still rock with us. So, I say that to say anybody who is Stewart-esque in that way, like everybody you named who sort of, came up under the whole Jon Stewart or Daily Show correspondent sort of umbrella, I immediately rock with them. Just because they have a different understanding of the nuance, you know what I mean, and how to incorporate. Again, we talk about the book talk that I did with Jon Stewart at BAM in November, and I think it was perfect in that he was able to just because of his experience as a host and as a comedian, he's able to make moments that would otherwise be probably heavier moments. He's able to inject satire or levity without being offensive. You know what I'm saying? And he's a genius in that way, and he's been able to bestow that upon the whole couple generations of comedians and writers who have come up. Anybody who's come from the Daily Show, like that's the immediate certification in my book because they rock with Jon Stewart, and he's one of the he's one on that top 5 or 10 people who I feel completely comfortable opening up to.
Now, is there any type of coverage you still want to get? Any kind of look, whether it's from a magazine or a podcast? Like, is there this thing where it's like, I want to be interviewed by this person, or I want this look, I want this conversation?
No, I mean, there might have been a point where I was like, I don't know, maybe I wanted to be interviewed by Oprah Winfrey before. I don't even know if that was a thing, but maybe I did, but it doesn't matter to me now. Like, I'm good either way. That's not to say that if Oprah wants to talk, I would turn down it. But I'm also fine if she and I never speak. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So yeah, like my list of people that I would want to do an interview with, or the wish list of collaborations and all that. I've checked all those boxes.
So was there someone back in the days where you said, like, this is the look I want? I mean, you kind of got the source cover and we had to share it with, 2 of your peers.
Yeah, so that, again, I kind of got the source cover, In that, the story, as I recall, the story was about like, wasn't it about like the underdogs or something?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? So it was, I feel like it was cool, but it wasn't, that wasn't a lifetime achievement of mine, like getting that cover with Pharaoh and Yassine, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I mean, it was a thing. I didn't blow it off in that moment. I know it mattered. It was important to lots of folks at the time. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, no, I don't know. I don't have like a wish list of people. I think I've already sat down, briefly with Letterman, but like maybe now, at this point in his career, I would love to speak again with David Letterman. Maybe do that Seinfeld thing, driving around in the cars and stuff. That might be cool.
Well,
but again, I think I don't know why, but people who I feel the most comfortable with in that interview setting are comedians who are able to, to sort of teeter the line. You know what I mean?
yeah, and I don't know if Selwyn's still out in the crowd, but and he could probably tell better because I believe that source cover actually like won an award. That issue won some sort of award, not necessarily for the cover, but for the overall magazine of.
Like not for you.
Yeah, no, but well, it wasn't for me either. But it was, but there was, one of the interesting things. Like, there's this website called Rap Zines, and they have all these old archives, and it's like a really great Instagram feed as well. And 2 days ago, I had asked Liz, like, hey, can you have a copy of this story I did with her? She's like, I look for it, and I asked a guy at Rap Zines. He's like, yeah, I got it, and sent it to me right away. And I was just reading it, and the whole thing was a Q&A with you. And I mean, I kind of liked the intro. I was like, oh shit, I had a little skill back there. I like the intro. But I remember I'm like, why the hell did I do this as a Q&A, right? Mm-hmm. And I realized that it's because I was late with it. And I remember Sal just being like, bro, just turn in a Q&A, we don't have time. And practically every Q&A I've done has been that. When I was at XXL, Vanessa would be like, bruh, they sent half this stuff to the printers already. Can you just give me the transcript and we'll turn it into a Q&A? And it started like transferred into this thing where it's like, I kind of learned to be good at Q&As because of that.
I was gonna ask, like, what does that say about your process? Like, do you think you work better under the pressure of, time constraints, deadlines and that whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I suck at deadlines.
What kind of student were you? Did you, like, you studied on test day?
Oh yeah, I studied. I did the homework in the class.
Yeah.
And I studied on the bus away, and I got straight.
I think I was that way until I got kicked out of high school after 10th grade, and it was on a technicality because of a lateness, and it changed just my respect for the concept of time and other people's time and my time. So I like to show up to some shit like prepared.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Do you prepare for interviews? Would you prepare if someone says we're doing a Q&A with Interview Magazine? Do you like research or do you just show up?
I would prepare for a Q&A with Interview Magazine, but I didn't prepare for this conversation because I talk to you all the time. Like, yeah.
I see we're supposed to be wrapping up, so I got to see if I have like a question. Okay, here's one. This is actually a good one. What do you know now about the process of journalism and how journalists cover artists that you wish you knew back then?
I mean, I guess I've come to realize that, again, the value, the authority, the amount of, weight that we place into these reviews, these pieces, these opinions of, other people. I mean, like that outward approval is not the end all be all. I wish, I knew that as a young person. I wish that was a lesson that I learned earlier on, because I've never been big on sort of, seeking other folks' approval, but there's a part of the process and a part of, just the whole music industry construct that was based on that for such a long time, so I wish I just knew what was up, you know what I mean, when I was a kid. Actually, speaking of, before we cut this short, I want to read something real quick out of my phone, too. I got a quick piece that I wanted to read. This is out of, I get so many dope, writers and poets who send me stuff. This piece, it goes, yesterday will be tomorrow as long as we keep things as they are. We may acknowledge that we are the fruits of our own seeds, but we don't always stop and realize the sowing is now, in this moment, this reading, this breath. We cannot control the weather, that's nature's work. We can't control the sun, that's God's work. We can't control the work of men or animals who would seek to dig into our beds and uproot us, scattering us to the winds. What we do control is where we plant ourselves and how we cultivate our lives. The soil we choose determines much. Our patience determines even more. But even as we look within, we cannot see within. The processes of our germination are beyond our senses. In that way, today seems like yesterday, but we have to trust in the process of growth. We have to trust in nature's work, in God's own, as we do the only work that is ours, the work of faithful cultivation and weeding and tilling and watering and doing it now, today, when it's not as fun or new or as promising as it was yesterday, when the adventure was fresh, that now it's work, ours and God's and nature's. And we do that, and soon enough, tomorrow will be today without our knowing. Who wrote that? That's a text.
And it took me halfway through that to figure out who wrote that.
That's his bars. That's a throwaway text from 18 months ago. I keep telling him we need a whole book of those, but it's that those are that's what compels me to get up and bust a move and to go and continue telling stories and making music, and that's the bar that I hold myself and the people that I work with too. It's people out here being great, so it's got to be great. You know what I'm saying? All right.
Well, I want to say one last thing, kind of to bring it back to the top of what we're saying, and it's that I never viewed artists as adversaries.
Yeah.
Any more than you view another MC as an adversary. Mm-hmm. If you ever take down another MC, it's because you're doing it for the art. We got into this as journalists because we felt that there was something important happening and we had to document it. Mm-hmm. Like you said, we had to document it because other people weren't doing it right.
I agree.
And anytime we criticized an artist, it was because we were trying to protect the art.
Right.
And trying to protect the culture. So I just wanted to end on that note to say that I never thought it was a adversarial relationship.
Yeah, I don't think our relationship was ever adversarial either, but just traditionally, right? The critic and the person who is being critiqued, don't usually get on as well as you and I do,
And I guess we're being told to open it up to Q&As, so anybody?
Yeah, how's this work? What's the question process? Is there a mic out there?
Yeah, no.
You
This guy.
We give y'all props to my favorite writers, Mr. Chris X, Mr. Tariq Crowder.
Thank you, bro.
Tariq, I know you said you don't live in yesterday, but there's a story I want to tell you really quickly that I think I told Amir. I don't know for sure, but it's the story of the only record review that I regret at the source. This is when I was a music editor, so I wasn't the boss. And the record in question was Illadelph.
Okay.
Have Life. And I was full of certainty. I was like, this record is a 5.
Right.
It's a classic. I want you to know, we used to have these meetings, these quorums. I walked into that meeting with God's wrath. You know what I mean? Like, this is the highest rating I'd given an album ever. It was a 5. I came out of that meeting, it was a 4.5.
Wow.
That's the official rating.
Yeah.
If it happened a year later when I was the boss, it would have been a 5.
Oh, thank you, man.
This little asterisk in history, it was a 5.
Love, thank you, bro. It means a lot.
Hey, how y'all doing? It's a pleasure. It's an honor to speak to you. Like that was said earlier, I felt pretty proud of myself knowing that I have you in my top 5. I was like, I'm doing something right.
Oh, wow, thank you.
Yeah, my brother was an MC, used to study you, would comb through your albums, as a lot of people have here. And yeah, my name is Malcolm, Malcolm Boozy. I'm an engineer building the next rap genius.
Oh, nice.
But I wanted to ask you about the blog era a little bit. I just read a book about Jay Dilla, and they went over how Questlove was a part of building OK Player, and like how conversations were going on the internet when it comes to hip hop in that way, and how people were talking about Dilla and you guys and Fonte with Little Brother, and that was before a lot of my generation was really tapped into internet and hip hop. That we got our time was like the blog era, like when Kendrick was around more so. So how was it watching Questlove build OK Player for you? Was like an online community for hip hop as opposed to like a change from Source magazine as he made the shift from Rolling Stone to Source to the blog to like internet OK Player blog era?
Well, like OK Player is something that we built together. It was Amir, it was the Roots, but it was our extended collective. It was, other artists that we were working with at the time. The Soulquarians and our extended family, right? My peers, the Talib Kweli's and Erykah Badu's. We all sort of, arrived simultaneously at the idea of just being able to reach out and touch and interact with our, biggest supporters and our biggest fans in a different way and in a more authentic and more sort of personal way. And the visionary, like responsible for really, giving us that game is a woman named Angela Nissel. So Angela Nissel, she started OK Player. I would say Ange started OK Player. She showed us the vision. She, when we didn't feel like going to, interact with our fans on the board, she would say, yo, just come and do this for 15 minutes, a half hour. It'll make a huge difference. And she sort of, she set that model. She established that model that, was going on to be applied, across the board in so many other spaces. But Ange is, she became an author, in her own right. She put a couple books out. I think she's got a new book coming out soon. But she is a very successful TV writer. She's a comedy writer and has been really successful in that. But one of the first things that she sort of did, like the first dragon she slayed was, just creating really that dynamic between artists and being able to reach out and touch their fans with OK Player. She revolutionized the game in that way. And that's something that she just did, and then she kept it moving and then went to do 2, 3, 4 other, great things. But
thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I have
got a question for each of you. EXO, you are just the bomb.com in every way that matters. And it's no secret to those of us who were able to work with you during those years. Were there any particular outlets that you had a particular affinity for contributing to? And also, Tariq, you had a fantastic story for the Greatest Day in Hip Hop podcast series about being there in Harlem. And only a little bit of it made the podcast, and I want you to tell these people that story.
Okay.
And Sheena, I want you to introduce yourself for those who are watching online because you too have a story to tell, please.
My name is Sheena Lester, and I was the editor-in-chief of Rap Pages magazine, and then I went to Vibe in between as music editor, but then I was editor-in-chief of Double XL magazine.
And responsible for that incredible Great Day in Hip Hop photo. Please.
So what was your favorite platform?
I didn't really have a
Yes, you
favorite
did.
platform.
Yes, you
no.
did.
I have favorite editors.
Okay.
Sheena was definitely one of them because Sheena was like super encouraging and always believed in me. Rob Kenner is out there. Rob Kenner is another one. Dave Bree, and Selwyn, who spoke earlier, because Selwyn and I like almost feel like two sides of the same coin. And as a writer, there were only like two people's pens I were ever scared of. And I saw them both today. There's like Rob Marriott and Karen Good. And like beyond question, like there was one time that we were both working on, I was doing a Wyclef cover story for Vibe. And I went to hand it in, and I'm super late and thinking I'm the worst person in the world. And Karen's like holed up in the office where she's doing a cover story on Lauryn Hill.
Oh, wow.
And they had her sequestered in there because they're like, the only way we're gonna get this out of you is if we keep you here. And when I found out Karen was doing the Lauryn Hill thing, I was like, can I rewrite my verse? Like, but Selwyn is, I always feel like Selwyn is a better writer than I am in so many ways, but we would always approach the same thing. And we would always approach the same thing in the same way, but very differently. So when I got to work under him as an editor, he would give me his way of like how I should cover it, and then I would add in my way, and that was some of the most complete work I ever did.
Is a great editor more encouraging or challenging?
More challenging, definitely, and more rewarding. Definitely more rewarding.
I can see that. Yeah, I agree. Just in terms of, a great producer. We were talking about just the process and how, if I'm working with Danger Mouse, like he's gonna nitpick about where I take a breath and, do this between this syllable, these two syllables instead of between these two syllables, right? He's more challenging in that way, but I think it's just because he just has a greater or different, he pays a different, level of attention to details. He just tapped in to something different, So yeah, there's just something to be said about, just a more challenging producer, more challenging, editor, more challenging, I guess, A&R. You know what I'm saying?
Now, the question you were asked in that piece, that the source cover we did, one of the last things you spoke about was being at a great day in hip hop.
Okay.
And you were saying that you saw Rakim, and you were trying to squeeze past him. And you said he stopped and dapped you up and gave you props.
Yeah, it was my first time meeting Rakim. So we talked about that in the source story that you did.
Yeah.
That must have been right after it had taken place. That was, sort of
and you were saying that back then you were saying the last quote was like, you feel like you wanted some sort of recognition, you get recognition from your peers.
Yeah.
And I was like, but you were saying you still didn't feel you were getting it enough, and I said you were getting it from Rakim, like,
Right,
what
right.
do you want? And you were like, I'm just bitching, like, that's how you ended it. But Sheena asked you to share a story.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's wild. In that moment, and maybe just in retrospect, so like right after the story, I wasn't satisfied. In retrospect, it was, just a watershed moment for me to, that first of all, I was up. I think the way they had positioned is, if you look at that photo, like it's hard to even find like where I was standing. Like I was in the most rando sort of spot. But I was cool with that. Like I've never been the one to fight to get into the front of the photo, or I'm not going to talk over someone so I have lines in the, you know what I mean? I just sort of fall back and just do, whatever comes naturally. So in my falling back, I probably should have went and used, had a bio break, used the bathroom before it was time to take this picture, but I waited, and then it was like, now they ready to take the picture, and I had to go use the bathroom. So I sort of held the whole shot up, running to go and use the bathroom. So I had to go far to wherever holding was. It was far. It wasn't like we're in front of this crib, and I go in the crib now and use the bathroom. It was a different house around the corner or something. And as I made it back, I was rushing back, and that's when Rakim was also sort of arriving, I think. Having worked with him now, I realized that probably was the case, because we have a different respect for time. So, but yeah, I'm just, sort of scooching through the crowd to try to get way back up to the top tier where I was positioned, and me like squeezing by everybody, excuse me, halfway not trying to make eye contact with some of these icons, because it's people that, I've only seen in a magazine up until this point. So yeah, many of whom I didn't, even consider I didn't look at us as being on the same playing field even. But in that, me, trying to squeeze past, I bumped into Rakim, and when he looked up and saw it was me, he was the one that was excited first. And before I could say, oh shit, it's Rakim, he was like, oh shit, thought, And that was just, for me, since that moment, I really felt like I'd arrived, Like you couldn't tell me nothing before, but you really couldn't tell me shit after Rakim was excited to meet me first. So, in brief, that was, the first of many moments like that, that I would experience throughout my career. But, powerful no less. Yeah, when I teared up telling that story on the podcast she's talking about.
So I see that there are 2 questions, and I'm going to ask you all to keep them brief, and I'm going to do them one right after the other, and then you all can take them accordingly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Latoya. I'm a student at Columbia Journalism School.
How you doing?
I'm good. Question for both of you. First for Mr. Chris. I'm wondering how it felt to have Mr. Tariq read your work just now, and then for Mr. Tariq, I'm wondering why it was important for you to do that.
Okay. And yours is the last question.
Hi, my name is Ime Ekpo, and I'm currently a contributor at Forbes. I was previously at The Source magazine. My question is for both of you regarding ageism in hip-hop journalism, because Black Thought, you mentioned something about how, back in the day, the journalists that would cover your work would not necessarily have the same insights and not stem from the same background as you. But someone like me who is a early 90s baby and whose beat is to focus on classic hip hop acts, I face a lot of adversity from not being, a full-fledged grown adult in the 90s to be talking about, or respectively 70s and 80s, as someone who talks about Grandmaster Flash, Grandmaster Flowers, and talks about Wu-Tang and Chuck D. I was told that I have no right to talk about artists. Even when I covered your freestyle in The Source, your Hot 97 legendary freestyle. I faced a lot of adversity because I'm an early 90s baby. So what is your stance on, post generations who came up or had prime times after your prime time covering your work? And Chris X, also, how do you feel about post generations covering classic eras?
I feel, it just boils down to a certain level of respect and, again, the amount of, knowledge. It comes down to how much you know your stuff. You know what I'm saying? I don't think it matters that, you were born, after the date in question or after the golden era, or, the era that you may be covering the most in your journalism, if you know your stuff, you know what I'm saying? If you've done your due diligence, I think that level of respect and that level of being welcomed into the fold of sorts is earned, So don't I would say don't be discouraged by let that be one of your motivators, you know what I'm saying? To get it right. Because, there's so much, even for those of us who aren't artists, right? Just people who were born in a particular place at a particular time, or, feel connected and, often rightfully so, just are connected to this culture in different ways and just feel a certain level of, of ownership, of entitlement, of, there's all sorts of feelings that people have about their beloved hip hop. But yeah, I would say, don't be discouraged as a young person, and just continue to to show and prove.
For me, I think one of the things I said is like, if you're doing a rock magazine, you need an editor there that was around when the Beatles happened. And I think if you're doing a hip-hop magazine, you need an editor that was there when Run DMC happened. You need someone there that was there before and saw how it transformed into this thing so that they can kind of like guide everyone else.
Yeah.
But that person doesn't necessarily have to be the writer. That person just has to be there so that when the writer does something, they can push back on them. So I think my only problem with the younger writers is when younger writers, like I saw something the other day that was saying like Jay-Z was like never like the best MC because it started like explaining like how every year who was the best MC. And it's like, you weren't outside. You don't know, Jay had us in a chokehold. I don't care who sold more records, who came out. Jay had us in a chokehold, and you can't find that out through Genius or looking at the Billboard charts. You just had to have been there to realize that Jay had dudes like not wanting to drive certain cars, just because he put it in a rhyme.
Yeah.
Like that was a superior influence than, they saying Nelly sold more or this person, so Ludacris was this. So I think it just needs to have somebody, and that's something that's been, as editorial boards and staffs have been decimated, we don't have those people anymore, but you still need that someone who can just tell you like, hey, like, this is where this point of view fits in this lineage. If you're saying like, Black Thought had this best freestyle where you like, let me tell you about the New Music Seminar when, Craig G and all these people are going off, like have a context for it. But like I don't even know if you know about that through Genius or through internet research today. You need someone that's gonna be like, nah, what's the other one that was going off at that time with Craig G? Super Nat. Like you need someone who knows who Super Nat was to say like, okay, this is where it fits in the lineage. And you could still say like, his may have been better, but you need to have this ability to compare it, not comparing it to, what Waka Flocka Flame or Chief Keef did on their freestyle. In response to him having read my words. He said a couple of things like that. He's really good for like saying things out of the blue to let you know he's paying attention. Yeah. And I have like maybe, this is probably like a 5th or 6th one coming in. I had like 3 or 4, and I have like 5 or 6 from him. And those are like those are my Rakim moments, you know. And it's also when someone says I'm his favorite writer. When I mean, I may have had a dozen today just from people being excited to see me, but those are my Rakim moments. People asking me, saying that this was the biggest event or whatever here, and I'm like, I'm at this event because I'm not suited for the other stuff. Like, I can't really, Liz was asking me to I was like, I can't break down a piece. I can't explain how I got to a certain thing. I'm not good at that. But when I get this type of recognition, I'm like, okay, I'm good at something.
Right.
So.
And you know, real quick, also to speak to that same question, it was important for me to read, you know, to give you guys just a glimpse of the mind that is Chris X, that I get to interact with, you know, on the daily, because you know, of the ways in which he's a motivational speaker. You know what I mean? He puts those words together, and they seem to hit right when I need them. You know what I mean? So it's just dope to have someone, you know, on a thread who is literally, you know, I mean, that I could put a Chris X book out if I really go through my phone if I wanted to. Like, I don't really need, like, he's already done the work. You know what I mean? But yeah, you know, around this time last year, my daughter was going through a huge thing, and was thinking about hurting herself, and we were just going through a lot as a family at the top of 23, and it was these messages that he was sort of hitting us with every day that really helped to get me and my family through that time. Probably unbeknownst to him.
So I want to say thank you to Chris X and Black Thought, Tariq Trotter, one more time. Again, this is exactly why we did this. 2 things I have been reminded to point out that if you go to the website, there are liner notes for all of these panels and for all of the events, and so please take the time to check that out. And second, that there's more. Day 2 tomorrow, we have an amazing lineup of people. It's an embarrassment of riches. We have Nelson George with us, Bakari Kitwana, Martha Cooper, who we were like tracking down all over the place. I was like, where are we going to, where is she? How can we find it? Finally got in touch with her, and I was like, we have some travel. Can we bring you in? And she was like, I live on 106. I'll walk. But we were thrilled about that. We will be paying tribute to the great Greg Tate. Karen Good was mentioned here. She'll be with us tomorrow. Akiba Solomon. I don't want to, because I'm going to leave people out. Jeff Chang, I think Jeff is still in the room. Oh, he was. Yeah, there's Jeff back there. And so just a lot of people. Starts at 10 a.m. tomorrow, goes till 5:30 p.m. tomorrow at Pulitzer Hall, Columbia Journalism School. And thank you all for coming out. And once again, thank you to the Schomburg Center for partnering with us on this. Thank you.